Hi, I've had a few people ask me about God rays or light shafts and how you can set those up. Now, if you look at this is basically what you can do if you're using a directional light. You can create a light shaft by going down into the details panel and enabling this light shaft occlusion, and you get this. At certain angles you'll get the light come through, but it basically only works if you are sort of walking into the light like this, which is not a lot of time isn't what people are after. They want to have kind of volumetric light coming down from a window from a side view, so something more like, if I can find it in this scene, something more like this, where you see the light shaft coming through the window, which you can't do using this system because it's based on the angle that you're facing the sun. So the way this is done, you'll have to build this yourself. This is basically a cone object with a material on it that's set up to work so that you can pass through it. It fades out, it fades in with other objects, and it's not affected by lighting. So I'm going to show you how to set one of those up. So the geometry is really easy to see. I mean, it can be any shape really, it's just a shape you need. I just made a generic cone because that was the sort of shape I was after to test it. So if we go to max, what I've got here is essentially a cone, which is really just a cylinder. So if I show you how I made this really quickly, just a cylinder, that kind of thing, with I put a taper on it, skewed it in that way so that it behaved like a cone. I deleted out these faces because we don't need them. I only kept I've kept a bit of geometry in here, but it was because when I was testing it out, I figured I might need some when I was trying to figure out how to do this, I thought I might need to use vertex color, so I kept some polys in here. You don't really need them. And then I applied a checker texture. If you don't know how to do that, this is basically just normal material in the diffuse. In fact, I'll just make a new one just to show you. So in here, click on diffuse, I go to checker, hit OK, and then just set the tiling of this to be something so that we can see it behave as a checker. Black and white, all set up, ready to go, and just apply that to that object and then set it so that you can see it. And then what that'll do is really quick. I mean, this is the same thing. A UV texture template is better for this type of stuff, but this is just really quick, and I just wanted to test it out. So unwrap UVW, open UV editor. For some reason, cylinders, they come wrapped sort of into 0 to 1, but they're slightly offset for some weird reason, and these bits on the end aren't welded. I don't know why. It's just Max being rubbish, I guess. So don't target weld, just weld them. So weld selected, and then still got issues. Weld selected. So yeah, so now you don't have any UV splits, and I'm just going to move this ever so slightly. It doesn't have to be too accurate. I'm just going to make sure that these are all sitting on 0 in U and 1 in U. So that tiles from left to right. So if we've got a cloud texture that we're going to apply to this, then essentially it will tile right around the surface, which is what we want. Now I'm going to do is just scale it in this direction so that it's roughly square where we're looking. It's close enough. So that's it, and then just export that out, and that's what you end up with, this object here. So the material, I'll not start from scratch, I'll just show you what I've got. Is here, and essentially it's made up of a few things, but nothing too exciting. Okay, so previewing that node. So if we look at it on a sphere, that's what it is. It's nothing to get too excited about. Basically, if we look at the settings, so in the main panel, it's set to translucent. That's the first thing, and the shading model is set to unlit. So that basically means it's not affected by lighting, which means it's not. It basically can't be it can't have shadows applied to it. It's not set to two-sided, but it could be two-sided. It doesn't really matter. I think that just would make it kind of brighter. So look. Yeah, it just means you're getting the back faces as well. So that's more of a personal preference, I think. Anyway, this version I've got isn't, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. Okay, so what do all these bits do? Well, the first one up here is basically the colour. Now, because we've set this to, because of these settings, the only thing that's open to us is emissive colour. But that's fine, because that's all we actually need. So what we've got here is a colour, which is kind of yellow, which I've actually picked from the scene. I've picked from around here somewhere. So that's what we're getting here. It's been multiplied by a value, and this is just to brighten it up. Sometimes it needs over cranking a bit because of all this other stuff that we're doing, which is just adding a series of different fades with different conditions. So you can use this, basically this value, to over crank your brightness. So if we look at that, so if I take that and set it as 10, apply, it should get brighter. There you go. See, so that's how that works. Obviously you could set all these as parameters and make this a material instance, and it would work really well. So that's the first thing. Essentially the rest of it is all going through opacity, and it's the stuff that basically makes this do things. So if we start to disconnect this stuff and reconnect it all bit by bit, if we can find a decent way of actually doing that. So let's go into here and just disconnect that. So let's just look at this first bit. So this is the bit that's basically we're using this cloud texture, and we're animating it, and we're adding two of them together to basically create a bit of variation, and that's more or less it. So if we stick this into opacity and hit apply, then essentially this is the first thing that we're doing. Now we've got issues because this all basically just plugs straight into, I'll tell you what, I'll set a more obvious colour as well, just to test this stuff. So let's make this pink, and I'm just going to plug that directly into the emissive colour so we can see what it's doing. Okay, so yeah, this is basically it. So we can see our cone really clearly now, and we can see it's intersecting with the surface. But what we've got is basically we have this cloud texture here, which is this here, which if we look at it in Photoshop, is basically all I've done is gone in here and gone filter in the red channel, gone filter, render, clouds, and basically that's what it's done, and it creates a tileable cloud. And in the green channel I've done exactly the same thing and then just saved it. And then when I've brought it in here, what I'm doing is I'm using the red channel, I'm adding the red channel and the green channel together. If I switch off the panners, you can see what that would actually look like as is. So essentially with the UVs we've got and this tiling across itself, that's what we get. Yeah, sexy stuff. Okay, so the next thing we do is we basically add panners to both of these textures so that we get some actual movement, which is kind of simulating or trying to sort of show the particles in the air being pushed around, like a little vortex. So if we apply the first one of these, you can see that this is actually panning this direction. So we've got negative y, which basically means it will come down, and positive x, but they're really small values, so they move really slowly. So if we disconnect that one and then we look at this one and apply this, essentially we've got this is actually panning across more, so it's panning down slightly, but it's kind of doing more. Seems like it's moving across more. So those two things together basically give us, it's subtle, but essentially it gives us that. Now we're adding them together rather than multiplying them because we want to, because this thing's set to translucent, it's always going to be see-through anyway, so we actually want to have a lot more white in the texture than you're maybe used to if you're alpha and stuff. So if we start previewing the node, this is basically what we're making. So you can see there's still quite a lot of black in there, but essentially that's what we're creating, and that's what we're using as a mask. So on top of that, I have this, which is I'm adding a value, a mid-grey. So this will therefore become this, which means it has a lot more white in it, which makes it a lot more full. So basically, if you want to control the density of the cloud that you're creating, you can play with this value. So if I set this to 0, this will get it back to what natively is coming out of this, which should be this, which is, you know, some clouds with some see-through bits. If I add this to it, it should become more dense, which it does. Not totally dense, but it's more dense. So that's what that does. I'm just going to set that to something like 0.5 for now. So that's basically how the cloud texture works. So if we go from that into what happens next, which is basically adding this system, which is the camera based fade, then what that does is basically, so the issue we have is if we play this now, if we were to walk here and walk into this, we get this. If I go really slowly, it might even be worse. See, I'm getting this clipping because basically there's no fade between, you know, this is just polys that we've drawn stuff on top of and we're walking into. There's no collision on it, so we just walk straight through it, but essentially there's no kind of transition between it being on or off. So we can do something about that by adding, that's gone quick again, by adding basically this bit here, which is the pixel depth. So we're using a pixel depth node, which you can just right click and search for pixel depth, and there it is, and pull that in. And essentially what we need to do is we need to divide the pixel depth by a value, and the higher the value, the longer this fade will be. And then we need to clamp it so that it can't go out of a range of 0 to 1, because that will break it. So that's just in case you're messing around with numbers and things like that. And then you just basically multiply those two things together. So if we plug this in instead from this point into our opacity and try this little snippet out, hit apply, then what should happen is as we walk into it, it fades out and fades in again. So essentially we can walk through our light without having that weird clipping take place. So that's basically that bit. So there's loads of uses for that. You can use that with, like, if you're making rain sheets or fog or anything like that. So that's fairly straightforward. So the next bit is basically this fade here is to control the intersecting geometry. So basically if I drop this cone in, if I drop it in, say here, like this, the issue we have is that we get this hard, same as like before, we get this hard transition on the floor and on here where it hits things. So there's ways you can control this. We could go in with vertex color and we could paint all this stuff out and create this fade, which you could do, but you can actually automate some of this where it fades when it meets into geometry it intersects with, and that's by using this node here called depth fade. So if we right click here and just did a search for it, it's there, depth fade. So you drop a depth fade in, you put in your multiply that you've just got from this section here, and you chuck it into the opacity, and then you need to give this a value which is basically a distance. So this has got a distance of 1000, and if we connect that directly into opacity and I hit apply, you should see this stuff fade out around the edges. There you go. So if I make this fade distance smaller, 500, apply, it should do it less, or maybe 100. Yeah, so you can see it's still doing it, but this is the offset you're getting. So if we say we want something like that, then essentially anything you've got basically fades out as it hits the floor. So if I push this back up to 1000, which we had it at before, it gives a really nice soft transition when things intersect with things. So the last part of this is to create where we've got these hard edges on the sides of our geometry. We can use a Fresnel to fade it. So if we look at what the Fresnel is doing, so if we come up to here and start previewing this node, then essentially what we've got is this. So on the faces that face us, which in the case of a cone will be these ones, it will be white or grey, and as it goes round to faces that don't face us, they will turn to black, which basically means they will start to, if we put this into the alpha channel, they will start to disappear, or alpha. So to be able to do this, I've got these two values here. I've got the exponent in, which if we play with, if I set this to 0.5, you can see that it sets the general spread. So a lower value will give it, something like that, which means it kind of goes to a point. And this one, if we set this to 0.1, essentially is the brightness overall. Let's do about 0.3. Then we get something which is quite bright but still has the fall off on the edges, and then this we can control kind of whether it's whether it for whether it spreads more or whether it becomes, goes to a point like that. So if we hit apply, we won't really see any of the effect of that because we haven't done it yet. So that's how that works. But the problem we have is that basically operates that operates the wrong way around for us. So we need to have this minus node to basically reverse it, so if we preview it through this part, we're basically seeing it the right way around, which is black on the outside, white on the inside. So that's why that node's there. But essentially, this is just a standard Fresnel node, and I've done stuff with those before, so it's nothing exciting new. So if I just drop that as it is straight into the opacity and hit apply and see what it was doing, which is basically it's fading, on the bits that we around the edges of stuff. So it's brighter in the middle, less bright on the outside. So we can sit and play with that. 8. Apply. Just kind of, so you're getting this like central point in the middle, working the same way as this is. Or getting a kind of like a more full, it's just fading out on the edges. So if that's what you're after, then you can go with that. So essentially all we need to do is multiply those two things together, what we made before. So that should basically give these a Fresnel on the edges of our cone as well. Obviously that's not going to work so well with things that, if you're going to use a shape that doesn't fall off that way, in which case you probably want to revert back to things like using vertex color and stuff like that. But the principle is exactly the same. And essentially that's it. You can play with those values. Let me feed our color back in, emissive color, hit apply, and that's it. So it's pretty straightforward. There's not much to it. It's a lot simpler than the one that Unreal or Epic use, because it's awesome, but it's really detailed. It's got blueprints attached to it and everything. This is just a nice, quick, dirty, simple way of doing it. Great thing as well is that as you go into the distance, it basically gets brighter. So it has much more visual impact. But as you walk into it, it just disappears. And if you look at it, it's just slowly animating. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Cheers. I'll see you in the next one.